Viewer discretion advised. The following video contains graphic content and depictions of heinous crimes. Katherine Knight, an employee at a slaughterhouse, made history as the first woman in Australia to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her crime involved decapitating and cooking her partner, John Charles Thomas Price. Instead of resolving their disagreements with an apology like most couples, Katherine Knight resorted to murder and mutilation. In February 2000, she brutally stabbed her lover at least 37 times with a butcher knife. Subsequently, she dismembered his body, cooked the remains, and even planned to serve them to his own children. Prior to her horrific act of killing John Price, Katherine Knight had already experienced a life filled with violence and sexual abuse, providing glimpses of the bloodshed that would unfold later. Welcome to Insight Wave, the channel that delves into both solved and unsolved cases from around the world. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest crime stories delivered straight to your inbox. Katherine Mary Knight was born on October 24, 1955, in Tenterfield, Australia, as the result of a highly controversial affair between her mother, Barbara Ruffin, and her father, Ken Knight. The situation became even more intricate as Ruffin was already a mother of 4 boys from a previous relationship and had initially crossed paths with Knight through her husband. The revelation of their clandestine relationship sent shockwaves throughout their close-knit, conservative community. Knight's childhood continued to be fraught with turmoil. Her father, a brutal alcoholic, subjected her mother to frequent acts of rape throughout each day. Barbara in turn often told her daughters intimate details of her sex life and how much she hated sex and men. Later, when Knight complained to her mother that one of her partners wanted her to take part in a sex act she didn't want to do, Barbara told her to put up with it and stop complaining. Additionally, Knight herself has asserted that she endured sexual assault from various family members until she reached the age of 11. During her time in school, Knight earned a reputation as a bully, inflicting fear upon smaller and younger children. During this time, Knight also engaged in a violent assault against at least one boy, employing a weapon as her means of attack. Additionally, she encountered an incident where a teacher, acting in self-defense, injured her. Interestingly, outside of these moments of rage, Knight exhibited exemplary behavior and was frequently recognized with awards for her good conduct. Lacking the opportunity to acquire basic skills, including how to read and write, she made the decision to leave education behind at the age of 15, opting instead to pursue work at a clothing factory. A year later, she achieved what she considered her dream job at a slaughterhouse, where her responsibilities involved extracting the internal organs of animals. Katherine Knight harbored a deep affection for her occupation. Even so much that she hung the knives over her bed that she used at the slaughterhouse so that they would always be handy if I needed them, a habit she continued, until her incarceration, everywhere she lived. In 1973, while employed at the slaughterhouse, Knight crossed paths with David Kellett, a heavy drinker who shared similarities with her father and had a propensity for engaging in physical altercations. Given her familiarity with violence, it came as a surprise to Kellett when Knight willingly participated in one of his drunken fights. Whenever Kellett found himself in a brawl at a hotel, Knight would consistently come to his aid, using her fists to back him up. In Aberdeen, her reputation grew for fearlessly challenging anyone who dared to upset her, often resorting to physical confrontation. However, it didn't take long for Kellett to realize that Knight possessed more than just proficiency in throwing punches. Gradually, he found himself being subjected to her dominance. In 1974, under the influence of heavy intoxication, Knight managed to persuade him to marry her. Notably, her own mother cautioned him about Knight's volatile temperament, expressing concerns about her daughter. "The old girl said to me to watch out. You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing and you're fucked, don't ever think of playing up on her, she'll fucking kill you." And that was her mother talking. "She told me she's got something loose, she's got a screw loose somewhere." On their wedding night, Katherine tried to strangle him. Knight explained it was because he fell asleep after only having intercourse 3 times and she wanted more. Upon awakening, Kellett successfully defended himself during her assault, thwarting Knight's attempt. Despite her trying to take his life just 1 day into their marriage, they remained together for an additional decade. The marriage was, however, far from perfect. It was marked by extreme violence, exemplified by a disturbing incident where a heavily pregnant Katherine burned all Kellett's clothing and shoes. She followed this act by striking him on the back of his head with a frying pan, solely because he had returned home late from a darts competition, after reaching the finals. Fearing for his life, Kellett made a desperate escape, seeking refuge in a neighbor's house before being hospitalized for a severe skull fracture. Law enforcement intended to press charges against Knight, but she managed to manipulate Kellett into withdrawing the charges by exhibiting her best behavior and persuasive tactics. Kellett was often unfaithful, and on one occasion, he abandoned his wife and their 2 daughters during the night. After uncovering one of Kellett's affairs, Knight resorted to placing their 2-month-old baby on the nearby train tracks just moments before a train was scheduled to arrive. Fortunately, the train didn't come, sparing the infant's life. Additionally, she brandished a stolen axe, threatening several individuals. Witnesses observed Knight violently pushing and swinging her second child in a stroller along a bustling street, leading to a diagnosis of postnatal depression. Following these events, Knight was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a duration of several months. During her stay, she expressed her intention to harm a mechanic who had repaired Kellett's vehicle, as she believed it enabled him to leave her. Despite this concerning threat, Kellett reconciled with Knight upon her release from the hospital. However, their reunion proved to be short-lived, and Knight went through a period of deep distress after Kellett finally did leave her. Knight met 38-year-old miner David Saunders in 1986, just shortly after her breakup with Kellett. Within a few months, Saunders moved in with her and her 2 daughters. However, he kept his apartment, and Knight became incredibly jealous and suspicious about what he did when she wasn't around. Like her previous relationships, this one quickly grew very toxic and violent. In May 1987 she cut the throat of his 2-month-old dingo pup in front of him for no more reason than as an example of what would happen if he ever had an affair, before going on to knock him unconscious with a frying pan. In June 1988 she gave birth to her 3rd daughter Sarah, which prompted Saunders to put a deposit on a house, which Knight paid off when her workers' compensation for injuring her back during work came through in 1989. Knight decorated the house throughout with animal skins, skulls, horns, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, old boots, machetes, rakes, and pitchforks. No space, including the ceilings, was left uncovered. After an argument where she hit Saunders in the face with an iron before stabbing him in the stomach with a pair of scissors, he moved back to Scone, but when he later returned home found she had cut up all his clothes. Saunders took long service leave and went into hiding. Knight tried to find him, but no one admitted to knowing where he was. Several months later he returned to see his daughter and found that Knight had gone to the police and told them she was afraid of him. They issued her with an apprehended violence order, AVO, against him. Katherine Knight crossed paths with a man named John Chillingworth. They remained in a relationship for a duration of 3 years, during which they welcomed their first son, Eric. Although there are no reported instances of violence within their relationship, it came to an end when Chillingworth discovered Knight's infidelity with a man named John Charles Thomas Price. At the outset, the relationship between Katherine Knight and John Price appeared to be without complications. Price, a minor, had 2 children from a previous relationship who resided with him, and they seemed to get along well with Knight. Financially, Price's earnings provided a comfortable lifestyle for Knight. In 1995, they took the step of moving in together, and everything seemed to be progressing smoothly. However, tensions arose when Knight proposed the idea of marriage and Price declined. In response to his refusal, Knight's demeanor toward him started to turn violent. Firstly, Knight framed Price for stealing things from his company and got him fired. Although the items were out-of-date medical kits that he had scavenged from the company rubbish tip, Price was fired from the job he had held for 17 years. That same day he kicked her out and she returned to her own home while news of what she had done spread through the town. Though he initially kicked her out, a few months later they started seeing each other again. However, this time, he refused to let her move back in. According to their friends and neighbors, Knight's violence then began to escalate. The fighting became even more frequent and most of his friends would no longer have anything to do with him while they remained together. By February 2000, a sequence of attacks against John Price reached its culmination when Katherine Knight plunged a knife into his chest. Having reached his breaking point, Price made the decision he kicked her out of his house. On the 29th of February, en route to work, Price made a stop at the Scone Magistrates' Court to obtain a restraining order, seeking to keep Knight away from both himself and his children. Later that day, Price confided in his colleagues, expressing his concerns that if he failed to appear for work the following day, it would be because Knight had killed him. Despite the pleas of his co-workers, urging him not to return home, Price firmly believed that if he didn't, Knight would bring harm upon his children. When he came home to find that Knight, although not there herself, had sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then followed his usual routine of checking in with the neighbors before going to bed at 11 p.m. Knight came home shortly after, made herself dinner, watched TV, showered, and then went upstairs. She woke Price, the two had sex, and he went back to bed. Katherine then took a butcher knife from next to her bed, where she had always kept them, and, in a frenzy violent attack, stabbed Price 37 times, in both the front and back of his body with many of the wounds extending into vital organs. According to the blood evidence, he awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Knight chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside but either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway where he finally died after bleeding out. Knight then dragged to the lounge room, skinned him, and hung his skin from a meat hook on the architrave of a door. Then, she decapitated him and cut up pieces of his body to cook in a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, squash, and gravy. She then made a dish for herself, though the half-discarded contents later found at the crime scene suggest that she couldn't finish her meal. She then lay down next to the headless, mutilated corpse of Price, took a large number of pills, and passed out. At 6 a.m. the next morning the neighbor became concerned that Price's car was still in the driveway, and when Price did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and worker tried knocking on Price's bedroom window to wake him, but after noticing blood on the front door alerted the police, who arrived at 8 a.m. The police arrived to find Katherine Knight's gruesome crime scene and immediately detained the comatose Knight. Once she woke up, she claimed to have no memory of the night before. In the kitchen, police found Price's head, boiling in a pot of vegetables on the stove. On the table, they found 2 full plates, each labeled with a name. In horror, the police realized that Knight had planned to serve John Price's body parts to his children. Police also found a handwritten note on top of a photograph of Price. Blood-stained and covered with small pieces of flesh, the note read, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You to Beck for Ross, for little John. Now play with little John's dick, John Price." The accusations in the note were found to be groundless. Knight's initial proposal to plead guilty to manslaughter was turned down, leading to her arraignment on the charge of murdering Price on February 2, 2001. Surprisingly, she entered a plea of not guilty. The trial, initially scheduled for July 23, 2001, had to be postponed due to the illness of Knight's legal counsel. It was later rescheduled for October 15, 2001. When the trial finally commenced, Justice Barry O'Keefe presented the 60 potential jurors with the option to be excused from duty due to the explicit nature of the photographic evidence. 5 prospective jurors chose to be excused. As the witness list was read out to the remaining prospects, several more decided to withdraw, resulting in the impaneling of the final jury. Subsequently, Knight's attorneys held a conversation with the judge, leading to an adjournment until the following day. The next morning, Knight altered her plea to guilty, resulting in the dismissal of the jury. It was revealed that Justice O'Keefe had been informed about the change in plea the day prior. He had adjourned the trial and ordered an overnight psychiatric assessment to determine whether Knight comprehended the implications of a guilty plea and was mentally capable of making such a plea. Knight's legal team had initially planned to mount a defense based on claims of amnesia and dissociation, which were supported by most psychiatrists, despite considering her mentally sound. No reason has ever been given for the guilty plea, and despite giving it, Knight still refused to accept responsibility for her actions. On November 8, Justice O'Keefe pointed out that the nature of the crime and Knight's lack of remorse required a severe penalty. He sentenced her to life imprisonment, refused to fix a non-parole period and ordered that her papers be marked "never to be released," the first time that this had been imposed on a woman in Australian history. To this day, Knight nevertheless maintains her innocence and refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. Katherine Knight has appealed her sentence before and was denied almost immediately. She is still serving her life sentence at Silverwater Women's Correctional Center.